Charlotte Hayes had one rule she'd kept for 8 years. Don't step into things that aren't yours. But she broke it on a Tuesday for a girl she'd never met. The child was standing in a circle of three, backpack too big for her frame, lunchbox knocked to the ground, contents scattered across the pavement. She wasn't picking them up. She was just standing there, hands at her sides, letting them laugh. You don't have a mom, do you? Who taught you to dress like that? Charlotte moved before she decided to. That's enough. She didn't know that the man standing 10 meters away, looking straight at her, was holding his breath for a reason only he understood. The lunch bell had already rung. Charlotte Hayes knew this because she had been sitting in her car for 11 minutes. Engine off, phone face down on the passenger seat, doing the thing her therapist called grounding and she called getting her face back in order. Same result. Different language. She had learned over the years that most things were like that. You could call grief by 100 different names, and it would still sit in your chest like something swallowed wrong. She had a meeting in 40 minutes. She had 3 unread contracts on her laptop. She had a father who had called twice this morning, and whom she had not called back, because there were some voices that cost more energy to hear than others, and she was running low. She got out of the car. The private school her company, partially sponsored, sat on a quiet street lined with trees that were just beginning to turn. She was here to sign a donation plaque, something her PR team had scheduled, something she had forgotten about until her assistant reminded her at 8 a.m., with the particular tone of someone who had been working for Charlotte Hayes long enough to know not to apologize for the reminder. She heard the voices before she saw them. Not loud. That was the first thing. Children being cruel are rarely loud. They have learned, even at 8, that volume draws attention and attention ends the game. It was more of a murmur. A circle of murmurs around a single point of silence. Charlotte turned the corner. There were 4 of them. 3 standing, 1 standing differently, the way a person stands when they have decided not to run. Not because they are brave, but because they have nowhere to go, and they know it. The girl in the center was small, dark-haired. Her backpack was slightly too big for her frame, the kind that parents buy 1 size up so it lasts 2 years, and there was a drawing of something, a house, maybe, or a sun, on the front pocket in faded marker. Her hands were at her sides. Her jaw was set. She was not crying. "Where's your mom?" one of the 3 was saying. Not asking. The tone was too practiced for asking. "You don't have one, right?" my mom said. "You don't have one." Charlotte stopped walking. She didn't know why. That was the thing she would come back to later, turning it over like a stone she couldn't quite set down. She didn't know why. She was not a person who intervened in things that weren't her business. She had learned that lesson early and reinforced it often, the way you reinforce a wall that you know has cracks. You don't look at the cracks. You add more weight to the other side. But the girl was not crying. And something in Charlotte's body, not her mind was already composing a reason to keep walking. Something lower, something older, moved before the rest of her caught up. She was in the circle before she knew she was moving. That's enough. Her voice came out wrong. Too sharp. Too large for the situation. She understood that even as the words left her mouth, understood that 3 8-year-olds on a school lawn did not require the voice she used in boardrooms, in depositions, in conversations with her father, where she needed to be the one who did not flinch first. But she couldn't pull it back. It was already out there, flat and cold and absolute. The 3 children stared at her. Then, with the animal instinct of the young, they scattered. Charlotte stood in the space they left behind. The girl hadn't moved. She was looking up at Charlotte with an expression that was not gratitude, not relief, not the wide-eyed admiration of a child who has just been rescued. It was something more careful than that. An assessment. Like she had learned not to decide how she felt about something until she had more information. "You didn't have to do that," the girl said. Charlotte looked at her. "I know," she said, after a moment. The girl's eyes were dark, not brown, something between brown and something else, the kind of color that looks different depending on the light. There was something about them. Charlotte couldn't place it. A familiarity that didn't make sense, the way certain pieces of music feel like memory, even when you've never heard them before. "I'm Lily," the girl said, with the directness of a child who has been the new student enough times to have learned that waiting doesn't make it easier. Charlotte Dite. That's a long name. Yes. Lily considered this. Then, thank you, even though I didn't need it. Charlotte almost smiled. Almost. She caught it in time, the way she always caught things in time, not because she didn't feel them, but because she had learned that showing them was a kind of opening, and openings were how things got in. She left without asking anything else. She signed the plaque. She drove to her meeting. She answered 3 emails on the way up in the elevator. She did not think about the girl's eyes. She told herself this for the rest of the afternoon, and by evening she almost believed it. She saw him 4 days later. She had come back, not for any reason she was prepared to name. The school was not on her route. The coffee shop across the street from it was not a place she had ever been. She had a perfectly functional coffee machine in her office and a perfectly competent assistant who kept it stocked. There was no practical reason. She had come back anyway. She was standing at the window of the coffee shop, cup in hand, not drinking, watching the school gate where parents were beginning to collect their children in the slow, unhurried way of people who had nowhere else to be at 3:15 on a Tuesday, when she saw Lily come through the gate. And then she saw who Lily was walking toward. The cup stopped halfway to her mouth. He hadn't changed in the way she expected. He had changed in the way she hadn't. The set of his shoulders was the same, the particular way he held them, like someone who had been told all his life to take up less space and had spent years quietly refusing. The way he walked was the same. But there were lines in his face now that hadn't been there before, and something in his posture that she recognized without wanting to, the posture of a person carrying something heavy enough that they have forgotten what it felt like to put it down. Ethan. Lily ran to him the way children run to safe things, without looking where she was going, certain that the destination wouldn't move. He caught her with both arms, swung her up once, the automatic motion of a parent who has done this 10,000 times and will do it 10,000 more, and set her down, and said something that made her laugh, and the laugh was loud and uncalculated in the way only children's laughter is. And Charlotte stood at the window of the coffee shop with her cup halfway to her mouth and felt something in her chest do something, and she didn't have a name. He hadn't seen her. She could leave. She had left before, from harder situations than this one, and she had done it cleanly and without looking back, because looking back was how you trip. She put the cup down and walked out. Ethan. She hadn't decided to say it. Later, she would think about this too, all the things her body had done in these 4 days without consulting her. The interventions it had made. The decisions. He went still before he turned. Not the still of surprise, the still of a man who has been waiting for something he hoped wouldn't come. When he looked at her, his face did the thing she recognized from the only other time she had seen it. It went careful, deliberately arranged. Every expression that might have been there packed away behind something neutral and polite and completely impenetrable. He had learned that too. She wondered when. Just her name. Nothing attached to it. No surprise, though she knew he was surprised. She could see it in the single second before the arrangement, the way you can see something falling before it hits the ground. "You're here," she said. "I live here." "I didn't know that." "I know you didn't." Lily was looking between them with the focused attention of a child who understands that the adults around her are doing something complicated and has decided to pay close attention in case it becomes relevant. Her eyes moved to Charlotte and stayed there. "You're the lady from school," she said. "Yes. Dad, she's the one I told you about." Something moved across Ethan's face, gone before Charlotte could read it. "I know," he said quietly, to Lily. Then, to Charlotte, with a distance that had nothing to do with the 3 feet between them. "Thank you. For what you did." It was nothing. It wasn't. He said it simply, not warmly. Warmth would have been an opening, and he understood openings the same way she did. She could see that. He said it like a fact. The way you state something you know to be true without wanting to discuss it further. She looked at him. "You're well?" The question was absurd and she knew it. 8 years compressed into 2 words and a question mark. "We're fine," he said. We?" The word landed precisely where he meant it to. He put his hand on Lily's shoulder, gently, briefly, the touch of a man redirecting, and nodded once, and walked away. Charlotte watched them go. Lily turned once to look back at her. Ethan did not. She saw the woman a week later. She wasn't looking for him. This was true. She had made it a decision, clean, logical, the kind of decision she was good at, that Ethan Brooks was a closed chapter, and that the coincidence of proximity did not require her to reopen it. She was walking past the flower stand near the market when she saw him. He was standing at the stall, talking to the woman who ran it. Young, warm-faced, the kind of ease in her posture that comes from knowing someone well. She was handing him something, not a transaction. The gesture was too natural for that, too practiced, and laughing at something he had said, and he was not quite laughing, but the almost smile Charlotte remembered from before, from years ago, from a different version of both of them. Lily was beside him, and the woman leaned down to say something to her, and Lily looked up at her with the open-faced attention she gave to things she trusted. Charlotte stood on the pavement and felt something go cold. Of course. The word assembled itself from pieces she had already been collecting without knowing she was collecting them. The way he had said "we're fine." The distance he kept. The complete absence of any explanation, any justification. The behavior of a man who has nothing to justify because his life has moved on to somewhere that no longer requires it. He left. And he built something else. And it's fine. It's been 8 years. It should be fine. People are allowed to. Her jaw tightened. She turned and walked in the other direction, the long way around, adding 6 minutes to a journey that she spent doing careful even breathing through her nose, the way her therapist had taught her, the way that was supposed to regulate the nervous system, the way that she had privately categorized as useful, but not sufficient because there were some things the nervous system did not want to be regulated about. She had been wrong to come back. She understood that now. The girl had dark eyes and the unsettling self-possession of a child who had been raised by someone patient and consistent and present, and Charlotte had felt something in that, something she could not name and therefore could not manage, and she had come back 3 times now, for reasons she refused to examine. It's not. She stopped herself. It was not the girl. It was not the girl specifically. It was the category of thing, small, unprotected, determined not to show it. She understood that category. She had lived in it. And her body, apparently, had not forgotten what it felt like to want someone to step in, even when the situation was manageable, even when you had it handled, even when you'd been telling yourself you had it handled for years. Her body remembered things her mind had made a formal decision to release. This was the problem. She reached her car and sat in it for a moment before starting the engine, hands in her lap, looking at nothing. The girl's eyes, dark and assessing. The way she had said you didn't have to do that, not as an accusation, not as a rebuff, just as information. A small person who had learned to keep accurate records of what was necessary and what wasn't, who didn't want to need things she couldn't count on. Charlotte started the car. She did not think about how she knew what that felt like. She did not think about it for the entire drive home, carefully and deliberately, the way you walk past something in the dark that you've decided not to see. She came back the next day. She told herself it was the coffee. The second time Lily found her, Charlotte was sitting alone at the edge of the park fountain, eating a sandwich she hadn't tasted since the first bite. She'd been there for 20 minutes. Long enough to watch 3 pigeons fight over a breadcrumb. Long enough to check her phone twice, see 12 unread emails, and decide that none of them were worth the energy it would take to care. She didn't hear the footsteps. She just heard a voice. "You eat alone a lot." Charlotte looked up. Lily was standing 2 feet away, backpack still on, one sock pulled higher than the other. She wasn't asking a question. She was stating a fact the way children do when they haven't yet learned that some observations are impolite. Charlotte should have said something brief, something adult and final that closed the conversation before it started. Instead she said, "So do you." Lily considered this. Then she sat down on the fountain ledge, not close enough to be presumptuous, not far enough to be a stranger, and pulled an apple from her bag. She ate it in silence. Charlotte ate her sandwich in silence. The pigeons resumed their war. After a while Lily said, "You were really loud that day, when you yelled at those kids." "I didn't yell." "You kind of yelled." Charlotte looked at her. "Did it bother you?" Lily thought about it with the seriousness of someone doing long division in their head. "No," she said finally. It felt like she searched for the word, like when thunder happens before rain. Loud, but then everything gets quiet and smells nice. Charlotte didn't say anything. She didn't say anything because something in her chest had just done something she couldn't name. A shift, small and tectonic, like a door opening in a room she'd sealed off years ago and forgotten she owned. She looked away, took a bite of her sandwich, tasted nothing. "Stop it," she told herself. "She's a child you don't know. This is not yours." But Lily had already moved on, unaware of the damage she'd done, and was now telling Charlotte about a drawing she'd made in class that her teacher had called unusual, which Lily had decided was a compliment. Charlotte listened. She didn't mean to. She just did. That was how it started. Not with a decision. Not with intention. Just with a fountain and a sandwich and a child who stated things plainly, and expected nothing in return. Charlotte told herself it was harmless. She ran into Lily at the park because she walked through that park every day, and Lily apparently existed in that park with the same regularity that birds and pigeons did. She bought Lily a juice box once because Lily's water bottle was empty, and it was hot. She helped Lily with a math problem once, because Lily asked and Charlotte happened to know the answer. None of it was a choice. It was just what happened when you were in a place, and another person was also in that place, and that person was 8 years old, and looked at you like you were worth looking at. Charlotte hadn't been looked at like that in a long time. Not with want, the way Lucas looked at her. Not with calculation, the way her father looked at her. Not with the careful blankness that her colleagues had perfected, so as not to acknowledge that she was the boss's daughter before she was a person. Lily looked at her the way you look at something you've decided is yours. Uncomplicated, unhurried, absolute. It should have made Charlotte uncomfortable. It made her come back the next day. She didn't plan to speak to Ethan. He was there when she arrived at the park, sitting on the bench near the oak tree, a thermos in one hand, a book open in his lap that he wasn't reading. He was watching Lily play with 2 other children on the grass, and his face had the particular expression of someone who has learned to locate their happiness in a very specific place and guard it quietly. Charlotte sat down on the opposite bench. She told herself she was just sitting. There was no rule against sitting. He could have redirected Lily before any of this started. He had done it before, a hand on her shoulder, a quiet reason to go the other way. He hadn't. He had told himself it was because she needed this. He didn't examine what that said about what he needed. For 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. The distance between the two benches was maybe 15 feet. It felt like a decision. Then Ethan said, without looking at her, "You don't have to keep coming. I'm not here for you." "I know." A pause. "That's not what I meant." Charlotte looked at him. He was still watching Lily. His jaw was set in a way that looked like control but wasn't. She recognized it because she wore the same expression every day in every boardroom and every family dinner where her father sat at the head of the table, and she sat 3 seats down and pretended the distance was geography, not grief. "She likes you," Ethan said. Not an accusation. Just a fact delivered carefully, like something fragile. "I like her." The words came out before she could decide not to say them. "She's a good kid." Something moved through Ethan's face that he didn't let stay long enough to name. Charlotte looked away. When she looked back, she said, "You have everything, you know that? A life, a daughter, someone." She meant Mia. She didn't say Mia. "You walked away from everything we were, and you built this, and I'm not angry." She said it like a person who is very angry. "I just don't understand what you want from me. Why you're still here. Why you're letting her." She stopped. Ethan finally looked at her. His eyes were the same. That was the cruelest thing. 8 years in his eyes were exactly the same, and they were looking at her with something she couldn't afford to identify, so she identified it as pity, because pity she knew how to be cold toward. "Charlotte." "Don't." She stood up, straightened her jacket with the small, precise movement she used to end meetings. "I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just—" She searched for the right word. Found the wrong one. "Fine, daddy, do or die you." She walked away. Lily called out from the grass, "Charlotte, watch this." And Charlotte turned and watched Lily do a cartwheel that was technically a controlled fall, and something in her face must have shown, because Lily laughed, triumphant, as if Charlotte's attention was the point of the whole thing. Behind her, she heard Ethan exhale. It sounded like it cost him something. Lucas Bennett arrived on a Thursday with good shoes and a dinner reservation, and the easy confidence of a man who has never had to question whether he deserves to be in the room. He kissed Charlotte on the cheek. He shook her father's hand. He said all of the right things about the company's latest quarter, about Charlotte's instincts, about the future, their future, with the smooth fluency of someone who has rehearsed the speech so many times it has started to sound like belief. Charlotte sat across from him at the restaurant table and felt, very specifically, nothing. She watched him talk. She answered when addressed. She smiled at appropriate intervals. Her father watched her from across the table with the satisfaction of a man placing the final piece of a puzzle he has spent years assembling, and Charlotte held her wine glass and reminded herself that this was the correct shape of her life, that she had chosen this, that choosing it meant it was hers. Later, standing outside the restaurant while Lucas spoke with the valet, her father came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything at first. He looked at the street, the way men who own things look at streets. "Then you've been spending time near that part of the city again." Charlotte kept her expression still. "I walk there sometimes." "I know." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Her father communicated most effectively in the space between words, in the things he chose not to finish. He looked at her. "Lucas is a good man." "I know." "He offers you stability." "I know." "Some doors," he said carefully, "once you close them, it's better not to reopen them, for your own sake." Charlotte looked at him. He held her gaze with the steady patience of someone who has never lost a negotiation in his life. "I'm not reopening anything," she said. His eyes moved, just once, to somewhere past her shoulder. Then back. "Dyke." The movement was too controlled to be accidental. He nodded once. Satisfied. Done. Lucas came back smiling, and put his hand on Charlotte's back, and Charlotte stood inside that gesture, and felt like a building that has had all its internal walls removed, and is being held up only by the facade. That same evening, Ethan stood at Lily's bedroom door. She was supposed to be asleep. She wasn't. She was lying on her back, drawing on the inside of her forearm with a marker, a habit he'd tried to break for 6 months without success. T. I'm not tired. You have school. School is tomorrow. She said it like tomorrow was a theoretical concept, unproven by science. He came and sat on the edge of her bed. She kept drawing. A small figure. Then another. Then a third one, smaller, between the two. Ethan looked at it. Who's that? He asked. Lily studied her arm. Just people. Which people? She considered the question with more seriousness than she'd given it when she was drawing. Then she capped the marker and said, to the ceiling, Dad, is it possible to miss someone you don't know? Ethan's chest did something complicated. Yes, he said. I think that's possible. How do you know if you miss them, or if you just miss the idea of them? She said it the way she sometimes said things, like she'd heard it somewhere, and was testing whether it was true. He looked at his daughter. 8 years old. Eyes like her mother. The question of someone twice her age, delivered with the innocent literalness of a child who didn't know it was a hard question. I don't know, he said honestly. Lily seemed to accept this. She uncapped the marker again and drew a small sun above the 3 figures. Then she said, Charlotte smells like a specific kind of soap, I noticed. Ethan didn't respond. I just think it's interesting, Lily said, that some things feel familiar even when they're new. Ethan looked at the drawing on her arm. The 3 figures. The sun. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned off her lamp and sat in the dark until her breathing slowed, and he thought about the word familiar and what it costs you when something you've never let yourself want starts looking exactly like the shape of everything you lost. He didn't move toward it. He also didn't move away. That, he understood for the first time, was its own kind of choice, and it was the most dangerous one he'd made in 8 years. Outside, in the room with the good shoes and the dinner reservation and the careful shape of the correct life, Charlotte lay awake staring at the ceiling. She was thinking about a cartwheel that was technically a controlled fall. She was thinking about the way Lily had looked at her afterward, not asking for applause, not performing. Just checking. Just making sure Charlotte had seen. I did, Charlotte thought, in the dark, alone. I saw. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did what she always did. She filed it somewhere internal, and locked the drawer, and told herself she would deal with it later. She was very good at later. Later had been keeping her alive for 8 years. The office smelled like money. Not the comfortable kind, not the smell of old wood and worn leather that Charlotte associated with rooms where decisions had already been made. This was sharper, newer, doer. The kind of money that had something to prove. Richard Hayes stood with his back to the window, which meant the light fell on Ethan's face and not his own. He had always been good at that. Positioning. Angles. Making sure other people were the ones who had to squint. You've been careful, Richard said. I'll give you that. Ethan didn't answer. He had learned a long time ago that Richard Hayes didn't ask questions he didn't already know the answers to. Whatever was said in this room had been decided before Ethan walked through the door. 8 years. Richard turned slightly, not enough to show his face, just enough to signal that he was choosing to. You kept your word. I respected that. I still do. You took the child. I handled what happened after. That was the arrangement. A pause, but you let her get close. I didn't let anything happen. She's been with your daughter every week for 2 months. The word daughter landed with deliberate weight, placed rather than spoken. That's not an accident, Ethan. That's a pattern, and patterns become questions, and questions. He finally turned. Become problems I already solved once. Ethan felt the room temperature drop 2 degrees, or maybe that was just his body understanding something before his mind caught up. What do you want? It wasn't a question. Richard heard that, and something in his expression acknowledged it, not with respect, but with the particular satisfaction of a man who recognizes a worthy enough opponent to bother explaining himself to. I want what I've always wanted. Order. He moved to the desk, picked up a manila folder, set it back down without opening it. Charlotte is getting married in 4 months. Lucas is a good match, stable, appropriate. She's almost where she needs to be. Another pause. And then, there's Lily. The name in his mouth made Ethan's hands tighten at his sides. Lily is 8 years old, Ethan said. She has nothing to do with. She has everything to do with it. For the first time, Richard's voice lost its boardroom patience. Not anger. Richard Hayes didn't do anger, he did certainty, which was worse. The moment Charlotte looks at that child long enough, she'll know. You know she will. Charlotte is many things, but she is not blind. He let that sit. Not forever. The folder opened this time. Documents. Ethan didn't need to read them to understand their shape. School records can be complicated, Richard said. Custody arrangements, especially informal ones, are fragile. A child without proper documentation is vulnerable to all kinds of intervention. He looked up. Or, you take her somewhere far enough that intervention becomes unnecessary. The silence in the room was not quiet. It had a texture to it, something that pressed against the chest. You're giving me a choice, Ethan said. I'm describing the situation. The choice was always yours. He drove home the long way. Not because he was lost. Ethan hadn't been lost in this city for years. He knew every shortcut, every road that flooded in spring, every streetlight that flickered at exactly the same time every night. He drove the long way because he needed 20 extra minutes inside a moving vehicle where no one could ask him anything. Lily was at the kitchen table when he got home. Drawing button. She did that most evenings, spread her colored pencils across the surface in a specific order that looked chaotic and apparently wasn't, and drew things that made more sense to her than to anyone else. He had stopped trying to interpret them. He had started just watching her choose which color to reach for next. She didn't look up when he came in. You forgot milk, she said. I know. I wrote it on the list. I know. She looked up then, because something in his voice was different, not upset, not angry, just located somewhere else. And Lily had always been good at noticing when people were located somewhere else. He didn't know where she got that from. He'd spent years telling himself it was just her nature. He sat down across from her. Not at the head of the table, not in his usual chair. Across from her, where she could see his face. Lily, that. He waited until she set down her pencil. Do you like Charlotte? She considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things that mattered. Yes. Why? A small frown, not confused, just thinking. She doesn't talk to me like I'm little. He nodded. And she laughed at my joke about the pigeon, Lily added. The real laugh, not the adult fake one. He almost smiled. Didn't. If you could spend more time with her, would you want that? Lily looked at him for a long moment. She was 8, and she didn't have the vocabulary for what she was reading in his face, but she was reading it. He could see her reading it, and the fact that she was reading it meant she was already more aware of the situation than he had given her credit for, which meant he had not protected her as well as he'd thought, which was a failure he would carry quietly for a very long time. "Dad," she said, "is something wrong?" "No, duh. That's the voice you use when something's wrong." He looked at her, at the pencil smudge on her left hand, the one she always got because she was left-handed, and dragged her palm across whatever she'd just drawn. And he thought, "I have been watching you grow up in the reflection of someone who doesn't know you exist. I have been teaching you everything your mother would have taught you if she'd been given the chance. I don't know if that makes me devoted or delusional. Probably both." "Nothing is wrong," he said. "I just wanted to ask." Lily looked at him for another moment, the way children do when they know they're being protected from something and haven't decided yet whether to push. Then she picked up her pencil. "She makes you sad," Lily said, not looking up. "Charlotte, she makes you a different kind of sad than normal." He didn't answer. "That's okay," Lily said. "Some people do that." She reached for the blue, drew something he couldn't see from where he was sitting. He stayed at the table until she finished. He packed the way people pack when they've been preparing without admitting it. Not frantically. Not with the kind of desperate efficiency that leaves things behind. He packed the way a person packs, when they have quietly, over weeks, already decided, and the decision was just waiting for an event large enough to name it. 2 bags. 8 years ago he had carried her out of a hospital in a blanket while her mother was still unconscious, because a man had told him it was the only way both of them survived. He had believed it. He had built a life on believing it. Now the same man was telling him to run. And the terrible thing was that the logic hadn't changed. Only the cost had. Lily's books, her pencils in the specific order she kept them, the stuffed rabbit that was missing one eye and that she claimed she didn't care about and always reached for in the dark. His own things fit into less space than hers, which said something he chose not to examine. He did not write a note. He had started 3 of them and stopped each time, because every sentence he wrote was either an explanation or an apology, and neither of those was what he meant. What he meant couldn't be written. What he meant was, "I watched you become a person for 8 years, and I am leaving before you can find out, because if you find out, your father will unmake everything I built for her, and she deserves the life she has even if I am not in it." What he meant was, "I never stopped." What he meant was something with no words in any language he spoke. He left nothing. The apartment looked the same as it always did, except smaller somehow. The way spaces shrink when you understand you won't be returning to them. He stood in the doorway for a moment, turned off the light. In the car, Lily was already asleep in the back seat, her head against the window at the angle that would give her a stiff neck in the morning. He had laid her blanket over her without waking her. She had not asked where they were going. She had simply gotten into the car when he told her they were taking a trip, and gone to sleep, because she trusted him, and that trust was the thing he was most grateful for, and most afraid of in equal measure. He drove. Not the long way this time. She noticed the silence before she noticed the absence. That was the strange thing. She had walked past the building twice a week for 2 months, had learned its rhythms without meaning to. The time the upstairs neighbor got home, the specific creak of the 3rd step, the light in Lily's window that usually stayed on until 8:30. She had not admitted to herself that she was tracking these things. She had told herself she was simply passing by. She had believed herself mostly. The 3rd morning, with no light in the window, she stopped on the sidewalk. She stood there long enough that a woman with a stroller had to navigate around her, which the woman did with the particular patience of someone who had learned not to disturb people who were standing very still. They went somewhere, Charlotte told herself. People go places. It's not a pattern. You're doing the thing you always do where you look for meaning in things that don't have any. She went back to the office. Sat through 2 meetings she didn't remember afterward. Signed 3 documents that her assistant had pre-marked with small yellow flags, because her assistant had always known, that Charlotte Hayes could function at full capacity while being somewhere else entirely. It was the school that confirmed it. She told herself she had a legitimate reason to call. She had been She searched for the word involve in Lily's life, in a peripheral way, an informal way. She was simply checking. The secretary's voice was kind in the way that voices are kind when they're delivering information they know will land badly. Lily Brooks was withdrawn from enrollment last week, the secretary said. I'm afraid I can't provide forwarding information. Charlotte said thank you in a voice that sounded like hers. She set the phone down. Lily Brooks, She had never known Lily's last name. She had never asked, because asking would have made it real, documented, a connection she could lose instead of just a warmth she happened to be near. Brooks, She sat very still. The office around her continued its business. Keyboards, a phone ringing 2 desks over. The sound of the elevator opening and closing. All of it normal and present and completely irrelevant to the thing that was happening inside her chest, which was not a feeling she had a name for because she had spent 8 years making sure she didn't need names for things like this. She thought about Lily's hands. The pencil smudge that was always on the left one. The way she reached for blue before any other color. She thought about her own hands. About which hand she wrote with. About the sketchbook she had kept at 22 that her father had thrown away and that she had never replaced because replacing it felt like admitting it was gone. She thought about Lily's eyes. She had thought about Lily's eyes before, in the middle of nights she didn't admit to having, and each time she had reached for a reason to look away from what she saw there. Because what she saw there was familiar in a way that had no explanation, she was willing to write down. She thought about her father's face the afternoon he had seen Lily across the park, the slight change in his posture, the way his eyes had moved, and then deliberately moved away. She thought about a hospital room she had not been fully conscious in, a nurse's voice, words that arrived already translated into something bearable. I'm so sorry. She didn't make it. She had believed them. She understood now that she had been meant to pull, that those words had been placed there, arranged in advance, a door locked from the outside before she was conscious enough to reach for the handle. Charlotte stood up from her desk. She walked to the window, looked at the city below, all of it continuing, indifferent, doing the things cities do, which is exist entirely outside of whoever is falling apart within them. She pressed one hand flat against the glass. It was cold. She focused on the cold. That was the technique, learned at 22 and practiced since. Find one physical sensation and hold on to it until the wave passes. It always passed. She had always been able to wait it out. This time, she was not sure it would pass. This time, the thing building inside her chest was not grief in the shape she knew it, not the clean, sealed grief of something long finished, but something older and larger and more total. The grief of a door she hadn't known was locked, opening. She stood at the window for a long time. Below, the city moved. Somewhere in it, or past it, or already beyond it entirely, a man she had spent 8 years hating for leaving was driving away from her for the second time in his life. For the same reason he had the first. Because someone had made very sure that loving her came at a price only she was not allowed to know about. And a child with a pencil smudge on her left hand was asleep in the back seat. Not knowing she had left a woman standing at a window who would spend the rest of her life learning, slowly and without mercy, what it meant to have held something without knowing it, and to have let it go without knowing that either. Charlotte did not cry. She stood at the glass, one hand pressed flat against the cold, and breathed, slowly, evenly, the way she had taught herself to breathe a long time ago, and waited for the wave to pass. It didn't pass. For the first time in 8 years, it didn't pass. She stayed at the window anyway. Some people don't leave because they stopped loving. They leave because loving you means losing everything else.